Well, I think what hasn't been mentioned so far is the shock jocks. So the fact that the Princess Bridge issue has been running very loudly on 3AW and 774, and obviously those presenters have a bias in favour of people sitting in cars because that's a very large constituency for them. And that it's also been subjected to, in my view, an outrageous, disgraceful and irrational beat-ups by the Herald Sun, the largest selling newspaper in Australia, which culminated in a ridiculous editorial specifically criticising the Princess Bridge bike changes. So I don't think it's unreasonable for a public debate or a motion to come up after major, powerful media interests are initiating public debate and attacking our policies. And we shouldn't be afraid in taking them on and slapping them down. And so I think this idea that we've consulted widely is true, but we've also been attacked widely, and therefore a public debate is a reasonable thing to happen. So I support the idea that the motion comes up. Now, I may have missed a meeting, I don't know, but my personal experience is that this is the first time I've had a chance to talk about bikes specifically, not within the broader council plan or transport policy, but bikes specifically. And I welcome the opportunity. And I was very impressed when we got a briefing note the other day talking about the fact that there'd only been a 12% reduction in traffic throughput into Swanston Street, and that there'd been a 36% increase in the seasonalised use of the bikes. And there's been obviously massive benefit for the pedestrians, including many Herald Sun journalists who use the pedestrian bridge on Princess Bridge. So I look at the data and I say it looks like it's a good policy, it looks like it's going well. It's a ridiculous campaign that's been run by, loud media interests, and we should release as much data as we can, and we should always be never afraid to have a debate. So I'm happy to have this debate. I wasn't on the last council and I haven't experienced all of that very intensive discussion that's gone on. In terms of we're rolling out an aggressive bike plan, we need to be nimble. We need to be flexible. If Latrobe Street looks like it's a bit gummed up, we need to talk about maybe taking out the on-street parking. We shouldn't be too ideological and say we've approved it and therefore we're just going like this, irrespective of implementation issues, irrespective of any data that comes through, irrespective of any loud media interests that bang the drum. So I think also I'm impressed with Councillor Wood's passion for the safety issue, and I say, have we in the past put parking revenue ahead of safety as a council? Because I've heard the RACV say the worst use of public road space is on-street parking. But you as a council have a conflict of interest because you make $98 million a year out of parking. And when I hear that passion for safety, I think maybe we have been putting our own revenue. And maybe one solution here is to get rid of some of our cash-generating on-street parking and clearing out and making more bike lanes, because even that motoring organisation says your on-street parking is useless. We would rather through traffic than on-street parking. So let's put all the vested interests on the table, whether it's shock jocks and their large share of people in cars, whether it's motoring organisations, whether it's our revenue, and let's release the data and roll out safe bike paths successfully, flexibly, in accordance with what sensible science and public policy would suggest, as well as the community's appetite to digest what are sometimes difficult changes. So I think that we don't need to regress on Princess Bridge based on the data I've seen, and that given the support for the St Kilda Road rollout, where we're not removing a lane of traffic, I don't think that's an issue. If this had mentioned Latrobe Street...
Yes, we are.
It's part of it. Well, it's... all right, okay, all right.
Keep going.
Okay, but
Keep going.
The throughput, as we discussed this morning, the capacity and the throughput to deal with the demand into that, there's not an issue with the capacity to deal with it, as the officer said this morning. So, if this had mentioned Latrobe Street, I probably would have voted in favour of the motion, because I do think there are issues there, and I do think we need to go back and look at that. But I don't see the same justification for unscrambling Princess Bridge and what we've done, and I don't see any argument for not proceeding with what is proposed on St Kilda Road. So I think for those two reasons we should support that. I think there'll be a strong mandate against this, and I think those who strongly advocate for bike paths can draw on that mandate as a renewed mandate to go forward, and we shouldn't be afraid to have this sort of public discussion in the chamber, particularly on an issue which has been vented very heavily in the media